What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence here with another episode of Required Reading. We have three articles this week, but the first one, I'm not going to waste any time. You may have seen my note about it, but in the New York Times this past week, there was an article on artificial intelligence. And to say that this is spooky would be an understatement. The article title was Designed to Deceive. Do these people look real to you? And in that, it was done by Kashmir Hill and Jeremy White. Jeremy White is the graphic artist for New York Times. He did an amazing job. But if you actually go to the website, you'll actually see renderings of people. But these people aren't real people. And that's kind of the crux of the story, right? Is just that with the advances of artificial intelligence technology, that's been kind of picking up over the years. They're really creating real renderings of people and ultimately putting them in different situations. But these people aren't real people. It's actually renderings developed by the artificial intelligence. And some of the uses kind of were disturbing from begin with. They said that there's already sites that have been around for some time that allow people to buy fake people, whether it's for video games where you could buy fake people, whether if you want to just add more color of diversity to your website if you're a company. Think about that. Now, these advances aren't without its limitations and some of its constraints. One of the major things has been their challenge with people of color recognizing them accurately. There was a lot of a lot pictured in the article about that, even with the people that they use for rendering. But I think the uses of this are endless. And I think just the bounds and the ethical bounds that are already being crossed, but that are going to be crossed with this is real. And I think it's something for us to reckon with. Actually, one of my great colleagues, my friends, Anna Homayun, who kind of heads Green Ivy Ed, kind of sent a note that said, hey, I think parents should look through this because I think when you're on social media now, and the interactions that you have with people, you can imagine whether child predators and the like using artificial technology to render real kids and then setting up times to. So I say that to say that as much as it may give great, I'm trying to even think about kind of some of the positive uses of this. I think sadly, because of the type of world that we live in, I think the uses of this for not for good are endless. And I think it's important for us to be aware of that. So this is why, the idea that, we should be aware of that this is required reading is why this is brought up for this week. So again, to Kashmir Hill and Jeremy White, this is the great articles in the New York Times. And in November 21st, this was this past Saturday, Designed to Deceive. Do these people look real to you? Read it, check it out. We'd love to know your thoughts. The second article was actually brought to my attention by a great initiative, Raise Black Voices, led by great colleague, friend, beloved Marissa Mike. And part of the initiative is to help not only raise Black voices, those in the media, those in journalism, but ultimately, to kind of shed light specifically on systematic racism and really focusing on that. Now, this article didn't deal specifically with that, but in an implication of systematic racism that we see now hitting students. Now, this article was by John Marcus in this past week's Wired magazine, and the title was More Black and Latino students were going to college than COVID hit. In essence, COVID hit and the enrollment, or at least the application and enrollment of Black and Latino students have gone down. Now, some of the major levers that they're kind of talking about is, just many of them having to rely upon home, the fact that many of them don't have Wi-Fi and have access and have these resources that would make it possible for them to do it in a reasonable fashion. Two, COVID has hit the reality of people's families, right? And so the lack of resources, the limited resources of those in the home affects people who are learning. And so this has actually led, and that this whole uncertainty has led to a drop. Now, on one hand, obviously, I think the concerns of this are real, right? Particularly in these areas where there are greater and greater populations of Black and Latino students who are emerging. They're in towns where opportunities, their prerequisite for most of these career opportunities is a college degree. The reality of them not being able to, or those actually deferring or at least not even considering this as an option given the reality is a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. But I think it also kind of sparks, this is why it's a good article, because it also sparks, on one hand, that's a real reality. And I think you need to kind of take first steps to get people to go to college. But I think we're also living in a time where I think I still have hope, given that there can be shifts, right? I think particularly in tech, especially from people who coming from coding backgrounds, recognize that in many cases, a college degree is not necessarily necessary. Not saying coding is the only pathway. I know that there's a pretty robust dialogue about that. But I think with the reality and the conversations we're having about student loan debt, the fact that there are more trade careers, particularly around tech, that don't necessarily require a degree, it still gives me a modicum of hope that this is something that could be flipped on its head for good. With that said, it's still the reality is just that this shows and this highlights the economic disparity that are really driven by at least more, I think, systematic disparities, right? That actually have implications, obviously, by race. So I think that's at the core of this, and I think it's just reasonable to see and reasonable to at least check out to fully understand why COVID is just not a one drop in the pan. Are we wearing masks? Are we not wearing masks? I think there are some perhaps potentially irreparable or generational shifts that are recurring because of that in the education space, as well as in the labor space, in many of these cities that require these industries that are aging out their workforce, but don't have people to require that are actually qualified by their standards. My sense is that we're going to see a move to kind of broaden the standards by which one will qualify. I think, two, we're going to see potentially an opportunity for many initiatives, programs to come in and really kind of come alongside these students to give them opportunity to be prepared for this generation, today's workforce. So that is just another amazing article to check out. Again, more Black and Latino students were going to college than COVID hit. It's in Wired Magazine's article this past week, and then is run by John Marcus. Now, the last article, I think it's powerful. It's in the New York Times as well, that's our Noah Harari had a article called "One Big Conspiracy Theory." Now, this kind of went through almost like a historical, philosophical understanding of how do conspiracy theories actually get legs? What is the appeal? What is the allure of people buying into these conspiracy theories? And I think particularly in lieu of the elections, I think this is a ripe topic because it seemed like every single day there was some new conspiracy theories about malfeasance. This was happening. And for the sake of our time, I won't indulge too much of it. But what I think is great about this and why I think it's important for you to read is what is under, I think, all of us. And I think for me, this goes beyond just a very empirically driven conversation or just a kind of a surface level conversation. I think it goes to us as human beings, right? We want to make sense of the world. And so it's actually easier for us to deal with uncertainty, to deal with things we don't understand when we have some sort of unifying philosophy, some sort of unifying answer to the question of why something happens, why these things are operating this way. And there's one in particular quote that I would love to call out that I think is really, really points to this. It says, global cabal theories are able to attract large following in part because they offer a single, straightforward explanation to countless complicated processes. Our lives are repeatedly rocked by wars, revolution, crisis, and pandemics. But I believe some sort of theory, to some degree, gives people comfort in discomfort, gives people stability in instability. And so I think it's so much it's as much the quote unquote merits of it, but there's something I think spiritual beyond it. I think there's something that is just ethereal in how we are drawn. Many are drawn to those things. Now, what's also great is that this doesn't discount any and all theories, right? It just talks about how we get there and what the balance is. And I think it gives a kind of frame to understand why many people may kind of drawn to this. And this is not just in the United States thing. I think this gives kind of a scan across history. And so I think it's a great article, One Big Conspiracy Theory. Definitely check it out in this past week's New York Times. And I think it's just a helpful framework to think about. So again, these are 3 articles, some wacky, but all of them I think are relevant for how we are engaging and thinking about today and the kind of times that we're living in. And so I hope that this is edifying, encouraging, and that you learn something. But as always, grateful that you checking it out. If there's any articles that you come across over the next week, please drop a note, send a text, and also would love to hear your thoughts and your reactions to this past week's required reading. Y'all have a great week.